My name is Gina Aubrey. I am 40 years old and I have worked as a paralegal for 11 years. In my career, I've read thousands of contracts, depositions, and court filings, but let me tell you, absolutely none of that prepared me for what my own sister tried to do to my child. 4 months ago, my mother passed away. When the dust settled, she left everything to my 1-year-old daughter, Sophie. And when I say everything, I mean the house and her entire life savings of $240,000. My older sister, Deborah, did not get a single cent. Instead of reflecting on why that might be, Deborah decided this was a mistake she could fix. She orchestrated what she called a family meeting under the disguise of healing and closure. But when my daughter walked into our late mother's living room that Saturday afternoon, there were no tissues for crying and no casseroles on the counter. Instead, there was a strange lawyer in a gray vest, a thick stack of legal documents, and 3 grown adults staring down a 1-year-old girl who had come alone. My sister thought she had the perfect trap. She made one massive mistake, though. She thought I wouldn't find out until it was far too late. What happened in that living room over the next 40 minutes completely dismantled our family from the inside out. And it all started the exact moment I walked uninvited through the front door. Welcome back to the channel. If you've ever had to deal with toxic family members, betrayals, or setting boundaries to protect the people you love, you are in the right place. Stories like this remind us of the quiet strength it takes to stand up for what's right. If you can relate to this at all, please do me a quick favor, drop a like on this video, leave a comment with your own experiences, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep sharing these real, raw stories with you. Let me give you a little background so this all makes sense. My mother, Ruth Aubrey, lived in this beautiful small yellow house on Maple Drive in Millbrook, Ohio. She was a 3rd grade teacher for 31 incredible years before retiring at 63. Her retirement was peaceful. She spent the next 9 years tending to her garden, sitting on the porch, reading mystery novels, and baking her famous lemon bars for basically every neighbor within a 3-block radius. Mom had 2 daughters. Deborah was the oldest at 45, and I was the younger one by 5 years. Growing up, Deborah was always the charming one. She had this way of talking herself into or out of absolutely anything. Our father absolutely adored her. He literally called her his golden girl, while I was just his quiet one. When he passed away 16 years ago, Deborah got the lion's share of his attention and assets, and I basically got the leftovers. But my mom, she saw things differently. She never said it out loud, but she noticed the little things. She noticed that Deborah only ever visited when she needed money. She noticed that I visited when she just needed company. She noticed that when her health started to inevitably decline, it was never Deborah showing up with groceries at 7:00 inches the morning. Mom used to say that Deborah had the charm, but I had the patience. I always thought that was just a soft, meaningless thing mothers say to balance the scales between siblings. But sitting in my kitchen 4 months after her funeral, looking at a stack of bank records and a secret letter I was never supposed to find, I finally understood what she meant. Patience was the only thing that was going to hold my family together when charm tried to tear it apart. I raised my daughter Sophie alone since she was 7. 2 years before my mom died, Sophie actually moved in with her. Sophie was 19 at the time, halfway through nursing school, barely scraping by on financial aid and a part-time pharmacy job. I couldn't afford to help her much because, let's be real, a paralegal salary in small-town Ohio doesn't stretch very far, and I was drowning in my own student loans. Mom had a spare room, and Sophie needed a stable place to stay. What started as a purely practical arrangement blossomed into something so incredibly deep. Sophie cooked dinner for my mom every single night. She drove her to every doctor's appointment. When Mom got too weak to hold her books, Sophie would sit on the edge of her bed and read her mystery novels out loud to her. When Mom had those terrible restless nights, Sophie literally slept in a chair right beside her bed. In those 2 years, Deborah visited exactly 3 times, and every single time she walked through the front door, she didn't ask how Mom was feeling. She glanced around the house like an appraiser and immediately asked about the finances. During her second visit, she actually pulled me aside in the hallway and asked, "Has Mom updated her will recently?" When I told her I didn't know, she casually said someone should look into that, poured herself a glass of wine, and left before dinner was even ready. Sophie even told me she overheard Deborah in the backyard talking to her husband Ray about the property value of the house. I told Sophie to ignore it, to focus on her nursing boards and on Grandma. I truly believed the right things would happen when the time came. Mom passed away on a Tuesday in January from pancreatic cancer. The hospice nurse told us it was quick and peaceful at the end, but honestly, if you've ever watched your mother's breathing slowly fade to nothing, you know that peaceful is not the word you'd use. We had a small funeral, just 42 people in a church meant for 300. Sophie stood right beside me the entire time. Deborah, she showed up 20 minutes late wearing dark sunglasses that she refused to take off even inside the church. The reading of the will happened the following Thursday at the office of Mom's estate attorney, Harold Kimball. Sophie, Deborah, and I sat across from his desk in this room that smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. Harold read it straight down the line. The house on Maple Drive, along with all savings accounts totaling $240,000, would go entirely to Sophie Marie Aubrey. But there was a line written underneath that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It said, "To my granddaughter Sophie, who was here when it mattered, Deborah got nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not a single dollar." I watched her face closely. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat there perfectly still, jaw clenched tight, staring at the lawyer like he was reading a prank document. When Harold asked if there were any questions, Deborah just said no, stood up, buttoned her coat, and walked out without looking at me or Sophie. That silence from Deborah lasted exactly 48 hours. Thursday evening, my phone rings. It's Deborah, and her voice is flat and rehearsed, like she had been practicing in the mirror. She told me the will wasn't fair, that Mom wasn't thinking clearly, and that Sophie had used undue influence to manipulate her. She demanded the estate be split between us. I could actually hear her husband Ray in the background feeding her lines. I firmly told her that Mom was evaluated by her doctor. The attorney confirmed her capacity, and the will was ironclad. She hung up on me. Just 2 hours later, Sophie called me, sounding completely shaken. Deborah had called her, telling her that Grandma was confused and that Sophie needed to do the right thing and hand over the estate. I told my daughter to listen to me carefully. Grandma wrote exactly what she wanted. Deborah is hurting, but that does not give her the right to rewrite our mother's dying wishes. Sophie went quiet, and then she whispered, "This is not over." I knew she was right. I didn't wait around to be a victim. On Monday morning, I walked straight into the office of Robert Webb, a five-year-old senior estate attorney at the firm where I work. Robert has reviewed more contested wills than anyone in our county. I laid out the entire situation. Robert confirmed what I already knew. The will was perfectly clean. Harold Kimball drafted it. The capacity evaluation was on file, and there were 2 witnesses. If Deborah tried to take it to court, she would be laughed out of the room, but I knew my sister. She wasn't going to court. She was going to terrorize a 21-year-old nursing student until she caved. So I hired Robert to officially represent Sophie. Then Robert suggested a brilliant, aggressive move I hadn't even thought of. A full financial audit of my mother's bank accounts for the last 12 months. He said, If there was any pattern of financial exploitation, it would completely change the dynamic. While we waited for those records, I gave Sophie one golden rule. If anyone asks you to sign anything, you call me first. You don't read it, you don't touch it, you don't pick up the pen, you call me. 2 weeks later, the bank records arrived. Robert called me into his office and slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were 6 pages with yellow tabs highlighting 6 distinct withdrawals from my mom's savings account over an 8-month period. $3,000 here, $2,000 there, one massive chunk of $5,000. It totaled exactly $15,000. All of this money was drained while my mom was in hospice, far too weak to leave the house. But it gets worse. 3 of those withdrawal slips had signatures on them. I knew my mother's handwriting. She wrote in a narrow cursive that tilted to the right. The signatures on these slips were thick, deliberate, and aggressively upright, like someone pressing down hard trying to imitate a frail hand. The last withdrawal was made just 9 days before Mom died, when she was on continuous pain management and could barely hold a water cup. Robert looked at me and reminded me that forgery of a financial document is a felony in Ohio. But if we filed criminal charges, it would become a public nuclear option. I decided to hold on to the proof. We got copies certified, and I locked them away in my briefcase in the back of my closet, just waiting for Deborah to make a move she couldn't walk back. And boy, did she make a move. Deborah launched a full-scale smear campaign. She called our Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, and every cousin we had, spinning this tragic tale of how my manipulative daughter brainwashed our elderly mother and how I was backing her up just to funnel the money into my own pockets. Our cousin Ellen called me, totally confused, saying Deborah sounded so hurt. I told Ellen the absolute truth. Deborah visited 3 times in 2 years, while Sophie literally fed and bathed our mother. Then Ray's mother, Brenda, took to Facebook, posting passive-aggressive statuses about people taking advantage of elders and calling it love. Ray even showed up at my front door one night while Sophie was studying. He banged on the door, trying to intimidate me, telling me this was a family issue, not a courtroom. I looked him dead in the eye through the door frame and asked him if he wanted to discuss the $15,000 that magically disappeared from my dying mother's account. He went dead silent, walked back to his truck, sat in the dark for 20 minutes, and drove away. But the bullying was taking its toll. One afternoon, Sophie came home from campus with red, puffy eyes. Deborah had stalked her at her nursing building, cornered her in the parking lot in front of her friends, and screamed at her, calling her a thief and saying her grandmother would be ashamed of her. That night, over a dinner of leftover pasta, my strong, brave daughter broke down. She asked if she should just give the house and the money to Deborah to make the harassment stop. She had her nursing boards in 5 weeks and couldn't handle constantly looking over her shoulder. I looked at my daughter and thought of the last thing my mother said to me. Sophie is the one who stayed. I told Sophie, absolutely not. She earned this and I was going to fix it. The very next morning, Deborah's trap was set. She sent a group text to the whole family scheduling a family meeting for Saturday at 2 p.m. at Mom's house to settle things like adults. I told Sophie she was going to go alone, but she was going to sit, listen, and absolutely not sign a single piece of paper. If they brought a lawyer, all she had to say was, I need time to review this with my own counsel. Meanwhile, I called Robert and we organized our counterattack. But life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need right when you need it. 2 days before this showdown, Sophie was at Mom's house packing up some closets. She opened Grandma's old cedar jewelry box to find a pearl brooch to wear, and hidden under the velvet lining was a handwritten letter addressed to me. I drove over immediately. The smell of cedar and my mother's lotion hit me. It was written on yellow legal paper in Mom's unmistakable tilting cursive. The letter stated clearly that Deborah had borrowed $80,000 from her over 15 years and never paid back a single dime. It also explicitly stated that Mom knew someone had been withdrawing money from her savings while she was hospitalized. She wrote, "I did not confront her because I did not have the strength for that fight, but I changed my will because love should not be a debt someone collects on. Show this to your mother, she will know what to do." The absolute chills that ran down my spine. We took the letter to Robert the next morning. He confirmed it established intent, proved Mom was aware of the exploitation, and perfectly explained the disinheritance. We loaded the certified will, the bank audit, the forensic handwriting analysis of the forged signatures, and the letter into my briefcase. We were going to war. Saturday arrives. Sophie drives to the house wearing Mom's pearl brooch, looking like a total warrior. I parked 2 blocks away behind a hardware store, and Robert sat in his silver sedan 1 block north, waiting for my signal. From my car, I saw Ray's truck and a dark gray sedan I didn't recognize. They had brought a lawyer. Sophie texted me from inside. "There is a man I don't know. Gray vest, briefcase, sitting at the dining table. I told Robert to get ready." Inside that house, Deborah was sitting calmly on the couch like a queen holding court. Ray was playing the tough bouncer by the window, and Ray's mother, Brenda, was glaring from a recliner. And sitting at the table was Neil Pratt. Neil wasn't even an estate attorney. He was a general practice lawyer who handled DUIs and property disputes, a buddy of Ray's from the VFW. They immediately slid a manila envelope across the table to my 1-year-old daughter. Neil pulled out a document labeled Voluntary Relinquishment of Rights to Estate Assets. He told her it was standard procedure, that once she signed it, everything would transfer to Deborah and they could all move forward. Can you even imagine? 3 adults and a lawyer pressuring a young college student to sign away her entire future. Deborah leaned in, putting on her best fake sweet voice, telling Sophie she was too young to handle a house and $200,000, and that family takes care of family. Sophie looked at them, cool as ice, and said, "I need to read this with my own attorney." Neil pushed back, insisting it was just a simple family agreement. The room went dead quiet as they all stared her down. That is exactly when I opened the front door. I didn't knock. I just walked in, set my briefcase by my feet, and stood right beside my daughter. Deborah sputtered that this was a private meeting and I wasn't invited. Neil puffed his chest and said it was a private discussion. I looked this fake lawyer up and down and said, "A private discussion with a lawyer present, a legal document on the table, and no independent counsel for the signatory? That's not a discussion. That is a pressure campaign." Deborah tried to play the victim card, saying she just wanted to manage the estate to make sure everyone benefited. I shut her down quietly, telling her she had absolutely no right to Mom's money or house. I then turned to Neil and publicly humiliated him. I exposed him as a DUI lawyer, stated he was not retained by Sophie, and declared that any document she signed in that room without her own counsel was completely contestable. The room froze, and then the front door opened again. It was our cousin Ellen, carrying a bottle of wine. Deborah had lied to Ellen, telling her this was just a family dinner with Mom's pot roast to look at old photos. Ellen took one look at the lawyer and the documents and immediately realized she had been manipulated into being an audience member for an ambush. That was the moment I texted Robert the word, "now." 90 seconds later, 3 measured professional knocks hit the door. I opened it, and Robert Webb walked in wearing a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase, looking like the absolute grim reaper of estate law. He introduced himself, stated he represented Sophie in all matters, and completely vaporized Neil Pratt. Neil's face went ghost white. He immediately started packing up his papers. Robert picked up the shady relinquishment document, read it, and announced to the room that it had zero legal standing. He declared that the will of Ruth Aubrey was executed, witnessed, evaluated by a physician, and certified by the probate court. Sophie was the sole beneficiary, and that was a court-certified fact. Brenda tried to argue it was a family matter. Robert coldly told her that the second they brought a lawyer and a legal document to pressure a beneficiary, it stopped being a family matter. Ray grabbed his jacket and literally fled out the door. Neil tucked his tail and followed him. Suddenly, Deborah wasn't in charge anymore. She collapsed back onto the couch, her voice shaking, crying that Mom loved her and wouldn't leave her with nothing. She cried that everyone was treating her like a villain. I looked at this woman who had stalked my daughter, called her a thief, and forged our dying mother's signature, and I decided she was about to find out exactly what she deserved. I opened my briefcase. The click echoed in the silent room. I pulled out the certified audit and laid out the 6 withdrawal statements across the coffee table. $3,000, $2,000, $5,000, totaling $15,000, all taken while Mom was in hospice. Then I pulled out the forensic document examiner's report confirming the signatures on the withdrawal slips were heavy, upright forgeries, completely inconsistent with Mom's frail handwriting. Deborah gripped the couch. She was physically shaking. Cousin Ellen picked up the statements, read them, and her entire face changed. Then I reached into the briefcase one last time. I pulled out Mom's handwritten letter on the yellow paper. I read my mother's exact words out loud to the room. Deborah borrowed $80,000 from me over 15 years. She never paid back a single dollar. When I was in the hospital, someone took money from my account. I know who. I changed my will because love should not be a debt someone collects on. Deborah tried to desperately claim Mom was sick and confused. I told her Mom wasn't confused. She listed exact dates and dollar amounts. She just ran out of time before she ran out of patience. Robert then stepped forward and delivered the final blow. He reminded Deborah that forgery of a financial document is a felony in Ohio, and whether we filed criminal charges depended entirely on what she did next. Deborah completely broke. She slid off the couch onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She confessed that Ray had actually left her in February, took his name off their mortgage, and she was 3 months behind on payments with the bank threatening foreclosure. She cried that she was 45 years old and had absolutely nothing. It was a pathetic, tragic sight. For a second, I just saw my scared, broke sister. But then I remembered my daughter shaking, asking if she should just give up her future. I looked down at Deborah and told her she could have just asked for help. Instead, she forged our dying mother's name, publicly humiliated her niece, and organized a predatory ambush. Cousin Ellen looked at Deborah in absolute disgust, apologized to me for ever doubting us, and walked out. Brenda grabbed her purse and practically ran out the door in shame. We left Deborah sitting completely alone on the floor of the house she tried to steal. 3 weeks later, the estate transfer was finalized. The house and savings officially belonged to Sophie. Robert sent a formal letter giving Deborah 30 days to return the stolen $15,000 or face the county prosecutor. 10 days later, she quietly wired the exact amount into Sophie's account without a single word. Sophie moved into the house in April. She used some of the money to paint the guest room a soft blue and turned Grandma's bedroom into a beautiful reading room. She placed the cedar jewelry box on the top shelf right next to a framed photo of my mom laughing. The door is theoretically open for Deborah if she ever wants to apologize and act like an adult, but the terms will always be mine. If there is one massive life lesson you can take away from this story, it is this. You do not have to shout to be heard, and you do not always have to fight with your fists to win. Sometimes, all it takes is having the right documents, the perfect timing, and the absolute willingness to stand firmly between your child and anyone trying to take what they rightfully earned. Nobody is entitled to your peace or your property just because they share your blood. Preparation is not revenge. and protecting your family is not something you ever need to apologize for. Thank you so much for reading and listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real life drama stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.